This is a tutorial for the RGB example sketch that was included in our Arduino kits. First, just kind of overview of why this code might be a little confusing to some of us. So first, this section, which has the slash star and the star slash, kind of like bookends, this is called a block comment. And usually these are at the beginning, kind of like how when you put your name, date, and title on a paper. That's typically how I use these. So in my own code, all I typically have in these are like my name, maybe like the name of the project, RGB LED, and then maybe like the date or something. And you can put some other comments about like what the code's doing, but that's all this first section is. Now every time we see two slashes, these are comments where the Arduino is not actually going to read it. It's purely there for us as the programmer. But as you're probably finding, or at least what I found this week, is when there's sections where it's like dozens of lines of code to try to explain a single command, that can be very kind of confusing. So I'm going to go ahead and just like delete all of these comments and just look at the code and kind of help show us what's actually going on in each of these lines. So get rid of all these comments. Get rid of all these comments. Yeah, especially when we get down here and I'm like, this is almost 30 lines of code or 30 lines of comments for a code that only has actually 1, 2, like 4 lines to it. But we'll keep getting rid of these comments, and I'll kind of try to explain these verbally to help us all. Again, here we have all this line of comment, which the idea there is it's supposed to help us. So if I send this code to somebody and I'm not there to explain it, these comments, if they're written well, someone should be able to understand what's going on even without me there to guide our hands. But as educators, often we're going to be there to guide our students through the process. But as you think long-term towards the future, at some point your makerspace, you're going to be transitioning it to a new teacher, a new instructor, or a new someone at your school, and they might not have all this knowledge, so that's a good place to make use of your comments, thinking of other people in the future as they might want to use and read it. Okay, I think we've gotten rid of the comments. So let's just go back to the top. The first we have are constant integers, just setting up that the red LED on the RGB is connected to digital pin 9, green to 10, and blue to 11. Nice little shortcut here. The constant there, all that's saying is somewhere in the code, maybe we might accidentally try to change blue pin to a different number. And the constant here is a reminder that blue pin will always be plugged into 11. We should not allow the rest of our code to change that at any point in time. So just a good little backup thing. Then here we made a display time. Pretty nice to put this in because if at some point I want my display time to be longer, I can just change this instead of 100 to say 500. Or if I want it to be shorter, I could change it down to 50. One of the nice things for that is if I have a code like this one, which is bordering on, I don't know, almost 100 plus lines of code, if I have all of my variables up here, controlling all the code down below, I don't have to go searching for where do I actually have this delay time. It's just in one single line that's controlling my whole code. Continuing on, we got pin mode. We've seen that before, so I'm going to skip over pin mode. And then we get to our void loop section. And now this void loop looks very different from what we've seen before. So instead of having analogs or write digital or turn LED on or any of that stuff, we have two brand new functions, main colors and then show spectrum, which we've never seen those before. The reason for that is whoever made this code said, we're going to make our own separate command, our own separate function is what they're called down below. And so let's look at this first one, main colors for now. So as your program is coming through, read, it gets to main colors and it says, I don't know what main colors is. So then it checks the rest of your code all down here for anything labeled main colors. And just so conveniently, we have defined main colors right here with this void. That's how we do it. And so in this particular code, the computer gets to our loop, it reads main colors, it then jumps down to the void main colored section and starts doing whatever is inside of this void function. So first, it turns all the LEDs off, which should look familiar from the first couple of times. And then it has a delay 1000. So if I was programming this, instead of having delay 1000 here, I would just put in the variable name display time. I would just put that variable in right here. And then every other time we see 1000 occur, because that way if I ever want this to go faster, instead of going through and changing every one of these 1000s down to 100, which as you imagine could be quite time consuming and burdensome, if all of them are just locating this variable display time, if I change that one number, every time I use it, it's going to change it. A nice little shortcut, not really necessary, but it makes fixing the code a little bit easier. But as we continue through main colors, and then here we turn on the red, next one we turn on just the green, then we turn on just the blue, then we turn on the red and the green, which would make kind of an amberish color. Then we turn on the green and the blue, orangish, then we turn on the red and the blue, which would make purplish, and then we turn on all three, which should make perfect white light if it's all working properly. So you might be asking yourself, Travis, why didn't I just put all of this and just put it inside of my loop right here? Well, a couple reasons for that. First, it's called modularity. So let's say you're working on a group project. Maybe one person's responsible for this initial void function, and you say, my first partner, Alex, maybe I'm going to say he's in charge of making this main colors portion. Well, on his own computer, he could be programming all of this section up and then just send it to me, and I could copy it as is. And you see that very often in the professional programming world, especially when you start having, instead of just 2 functions here, you have dozens of functions. Maybe each person on the team is responsible for making one of those functions, and then one person's responsible for this overall void loop portion. But that's all we're doing. So after we go through main colors and we get all the way to the end to this closing curly brace right here, then that says main colors has finished. Our program jumps back up to our loop main. It has now finished main colors. Now it goes to show spectrum. So once again, from there, it searches down the code for any show spectrum functions, which I didn't get rid of these comments, which just so happens to occur right down here, show spectrum. Well, as we look inside show spectrum, so I get rid of these comments, the code for show spectrum is actually fairly short. First, I'm just making a placeholder variable called x, and then I'm saying for x to go from 0 up to 768, because that's how many combination of colors our RGB LED has. And so I'm going to try to hit every single one of those combinations between, and that's how many. This x++ will be important in a minute. We'll get there shortly. So as it starts, it says, okay, let's make a variable x. It says, okay, my first value of x is going to be 0. So go with me now, x is equal to 0. It jumps down to the first curly brace. And now we see it has show RGB with an x. This is another function. So this is not something that comes on the Arduino. And so just like how up here, when we had the Arduino saw main colors and jumped down to main colors, we saw show spectrum and it jumped down to show spectrum. Here we see show RGB X, and it's going to jump down to void show RGB. The main difference between the two is the first two they don't have anything in between the parentheses there, but we actually are able to give insert values here. And so the idea for this show RGB function is it's going to take in a number between 0 and 768. So let's say we put in the number 212. So RGB 212, that's they find the 212th color and light up our lights in that fashion. We could say show RGB 550, and it would find the 550th color and display that on the RGB. So this is what I found a little confusing, that inside this first void function, all it's really doing is redirecting us to another void function, which I found a little confusing. So when I went through and I redid this, I made this void function and just had all of this code just inside of this function right here. But we'll go with the example for now. So we started off, x is equal to 0 for the first one. So it says jump down to show RGB with a value of x equal to 0. So it jumps down here, make a few variables. And this is where we identified that input thing that we're just calling a placeholder color. And so right now our value of x is equal to 0. So then we get to this if-else statement. So right now, remember we put x equals 0. So we would say, okay, is 0 less than or equal to 255? Well, of course 0 is less than or equal to 255. At which point it says, okay, we're going to have our red intensity equals 255 minus 0. So 255, we're going to have our green intensity equals our value, which right now is 0. Our blue intensity, which we're setting to 0. And out of these if and else statements, it can only pick one of them. Don't need to worry about that too much right now. But we went inside our if right here, so that's all fine. It jumps down here. And then this is where it's actually turning on the red, the blue, and the green LED with whatever values our if-else structure makes up here. At which point our program jumps back here, and it says, okay, delay for 10 milliseconds. It reaches this brace, and it goes back up to 4. Now this is where this plus plus comes in. So previously our value of x was 0. Now that we have finished one loop, we go back, and now xx has been incremented up to 1. That's what this plus plus means. It means just go up by one value. So now x is equal to 1. So it goes show RGB 1, jumps again back to our show RGB function. So now our red intensity will be 255 minus 1, or 254. Green will be 1. Blue is still set to 0. Changes the colors, and it jumps back to show RGB. Delays for 10 milliseconds. Then again, it increments up to x equals 2. Goes through, x equals 3, x equals 4, x equals 5. Repeat, 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 all the way up to eventually we hit 256. So once we hit 256, we come down here and we see, oh hey, 256 is no longer less than or equal to 255. So this section of the code is now going to get skipped. So then ask, is our value less than or equal to 511? Well, 256, yes, it's less than or equal to 511. So now it's setting up this next section of code. I'm kind of ignoring where all these numbers came from right now. If you want a further explanation, I can do that later. But I think kind of seeing the value of where, what the if and else if and stuff is doing is more valuable than this specific code. So then 256, it goes through and changes the color accordingly and updates the colors, and then jumps back here again, increments after the delay to 257, 258, 259, so on and so forth until eventually we hit 512. At which point when 512 comes down to show RGB, It is not less than 255. It is not less than 511. So then it gets to our else statement, and here the author put in a comment if the color is bigger than 512, which that's where we're at now. And this gives just a different color combination. Again, not going to get into that. And then it keeps going, 512 to 513, 514, so on and so forth, until eventually it gets to 768. Once it gets to 768, this for loop has been completed. It goes to this curly brace, which says this void function has now been completed. And it jumps all the way back up to our void main. All that was just doing the show spectrum function, at which point we show that our void loop has been completed, and then it jumps back and continues looping. So we go through main colors again, and then through show spectrum again. So yeah, that's kind of the in-words description of what happens with this circuit 03 example. I'm going to do circuit 04 as well, and hopefully that'll be useful. Let me know if you have any comments for things I can help you with, improve upon, just to make all of our Arduinoing experiences just a little bit better.